page 5. 5, coming down, item number 2.
Yeah, I see that, I didn't see the, oh, I see.
Yeah.
All right,
And then number 4, again, I added the health code requirement about the keeping of swine. And then on the last page, I think nothing was, other than just clearing up, I did speak with a guy from the Department of Agriculture at the state level. And the state's gonna get involved if it's licensed or if it's a commercial kind of activity. If it's just a personal use, it's more handled more at the local level. So that's kind of the difference, but like the state would get brought in if you had something, and USDA could get brought into if it was slaughtering of animals and that kinds of thing. But basically, you would look more at the Natural Resource Conservation Service or some other local agency to help with the design of manure plans and things like that if that assistance were needed. So I just cleaned up that language a little bit and added a state reference.
in paragraph 7, it says manure shall be in compliance, I should say, manure shall be managed in compliance.
Okay, yeah. So those are essentially the changes based on the hearing.
So who, right, this is commercial, so it technically falls under what the state defines for what they can and can't do, that whole grid of how many animals they can have.
It depends on, it's commercial in the sense that you are allowing it to be, so the commercial ones that we have examples are like horse farms, where you had horse, that kind of thing. So you're allowing a larger number of animals for some kind of, in this situation, an economic, use for that.
Business.
So, yeah, at what point he would be regulated, what he does on that, it would depend on, what he decided to do as far as offering for sale. I think that may be where the Department of Agriculture might get involved on a commercial property such as his, if he were offering something for sale. I'm, again, it's gonna be something that as you go through an approval process, depending what's requested, we're gonna have to nail down whatever kind of approvals may be needed.
I don't believe that he, from what he was saying and what I'm observing and having gone by the property, I don't believe he would be looking to commercially sell any of the products. It looks like it's just for him to sustain his family.
Did he, well, no, I thought that's exactly what he said in the last one. Didn't we say that didn't he approach once before about the idea of selling of
The reason he originally
meat?
wanted to get the
Selling
regulation text amendment 2 years ago, when he first came in. He wanted to do something that would, ultimately allow him to have some kind of sale there.
So, all right.
But again, that would depend on what he came in for in front of it. If you put something in place, you have to come in with a site plan and a special exception narrative of what he was proposing to do, and you guys would have to agree with it, right, and license it appropriately.
So short of that, and that line of demarcation, selling seems to be where the state or even the FDA gets involved. But I don't believe what we're looking at here crosses that threshold. So then who becomes the enforcement agency or mechanism? Because when you drive by the place right now, I'm concerned for his neighbors of what that may end up degrading into. So if it's not maintained correctly, which it sounds like he's had some challenges in the past, who's enforcing it?
It's gonna be a zoning enforcement issue, because you're gonna have a zoning approval on it, right?
Okay.
So, in the zoning enforcement, when it gets to something that's beyond the expertise of the zoning officer, you have to reach out to whether it's the health department or whatever, but it would be initiated through zoning enforcement, because most likely it would be in violation of some condition of the approval that you put in place.
So if he goes above the grid that says how many animals per acre or whatever
I thought
that
that
stuff
grid
was.
didn't really apply.
Well, what's gonna be is it's gonna be narrowly approved on what you approve him for. He's gonna provide you with what he's gonna have on that. I'm gonna have 10 chickens, 3 cows. He's gonna give you that, you're gonna issue an approval letter that's gonna say that, right? And then that's gonna be the basis of any kind of variation from his approval.
How many complaints were lodged from the neighbors previous, like when he had more just for his own, like his own household there, like, right? Cause he did have,
It would be unfair for me to give you a number, because
Okay.
I don't have it in front of me, I don't know. I don't.
that's my only concern is, are the neighbors gonna have to start logging? And do you have the capacity to take on? like what happened the last, like how long did it take to kind of rectify for them the last time? I don't know.
You know, it's how zoning enforcement works, right? Zoning enforcement is not, we don't have finding power, right? So we don't remediate. So a lot of it ends up being that you work with some sort of certain steps, and then you get to a point where you put something on the land records, like a caveat that, you know, causes an issue if someone wants to try to sell it or whatever. Or it's bad enough that you go to the town attorney and you say, start legal proceedings. I mean, those are the end results of zoning enforcement.
But if there's no financial ramifications, what are the legal proceedings aside from paper floating back and forth?
Well, I mean, there will be ultimately, I mean, he will have to answer to a legal enforcement action, right?
For what? If there's no financial implications, for what?
Zoning enforcement tends to just go on in the courts. I mean, like, we have 420 John Fitz Boulevard, which is one that was under the courts. I think now that he is bankrupt and now it's being reverted back to another owner. You know, eventually the properties end up either going somewhere or, you know.
That's a huge cost to the town too.
Miller
right?
Road is a good example, yeah.
What's that? No?
Miller Road is a good example.
Miller Road is an example, right? That went to the courts for many years. I mean, we don't have a lot of them around town. I mean, I could do it a handful of the ones that I can think of in my 38 years here. Over on Route 5, we have one, the Gaines property on the corner of Route 5.
Just kind of stepping back from this whole thing and forgetting about the applicant or future applicant, I am in favor of allowing this type of use in that particular zone, coming in from East Windsor, that historically, it's been agriculture, and I think we ought to encourage anybody that lives in that overlay zone to have animals, whether it's for their own use or commercial, so.
And I really have to encourage you to look at that from that perspective, because although an applicant came in specifically, I don't know if he'll ever even come in with an application.
That's
I don't
right.
know, you know,
That's
it's really, we're talking about a text amendment, and we really should focus on the fact that it's
Focus
a
on
text amendment. And then when and if an application comes in, maybe there won't be enough information for you to approve something that comes in if you're not comfortable with that.
So
right?
us with the text amendment does not give him the green
Zero.
light.
Correct.
He has nothing other than the ability to go now and see
apply.
if he can make an
Site
application
plan
work.
figure.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Michelle, on the commercial versus non-commercial issue, for this application, would it be appropriate to make a approval condition that he can only raise these animals for personal consumption for him and his family, that he can't
I
sell?
think that's something at the time of what you have in front of you. Of course, we're not talking about that now, because there's nothing in front of you. That would be something that I would evaluate when you're looking at what you're in front of you.
Cause there's some other larger properties in that zone as
Sure,
well. that
sure, that
could
might wanna take advantage of
potentially in the
this.
future end up,
Might wanna be a horse
deciding
farm,
to-
right?
Yeah.
You know, and I think
Farm.
we even call
Airport
it out
was
as a use
running
in that
restaurant
zone,
was,
but we
right?
don't really support it by allowing.
and
So
that's,
so this cleans that up as well.
we need more farming in town. We're losing it.
This doesn't hurt that at all. This helps that to help.
So let me interrupt people, because I forgot to seat someone for Commissioner Foley. And I'm trying to read the history here. Looks like Karashi sat for Cavallero, Kopchunas and Boganski both sat for Viteri, which means I can't, based on that, I can't pick between those two. But going back one more, Boganski sat for Bernstein, so we'll seat Commissioner Kopchunas for Commissioner Foley.
I also want to note Commissioner Viteri, I believe, was not present at either of the two public hearings we held, but you can still vote if you can state for the record that you reviewed the recordings of both of the meetings.
For the animal agriculture, I think let me withhold myself from that
Okay.
to vote, because
So
I'm
does that mean-
fascinated with the conversation, but not nearly
Gotcha.
up to speed enough.
Does that mean we'd seat a second alternate?
Commissioner Boganski is seated for Commissioner Viteri
Okay.
on that particular item, on the overlay. So, let's say nobody applies for the overlay. And we have section 712 and section 7, Those are still there. What is the difference between having the overlay and not? Just so everyone understands. If someone has to come in and apply for an overlay in accordance
Yeah,
with that,
the difference is you can only take advantage of the commercial agriculture currently when you're in the A40 zone.
Mhm.
Right, and that's what Main Street is typically. This zone is A20. The overlay gives it some commercial aspects, so that's why it was suggested that as part of the overlay, you add the aspect for commercial agriculture. So you couldn't do it just under an A20 zoning, because the zoning doesn't support that.
so,
That's the difference.
712, allows all these activities, requires the right fencing.
Yeah, and that would be for anything on Main Street, you know, you've had a couple horse applications on Main Street, you've had the Missoula, Animal Sanctuary on Main Street, so all that kind of stuff would be moving forward with any new applications on Main Street would come in with these criteria, yeah.
All right, I just wanted to make sure everyone understands, you know, what's there if they don't go in for the overlay, or what if they do.
Sure. If they don't go in for the overlay, then they're just subject to having, you know, the chickens by the chart.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions about this?
So we will make a motion to approve application 25-05P, which kind of erroneously is called Majewski text amendment, but it's all right. Request to modify section 5.8.4.6 and section 7.2.2.1 to allow commercial animal agriculture activities by special exception for A20 zoned properties in the Route 5 North overlay zone. Number one, the Planning and Zoning Commission finds that the zone text amendment is in conformance with the Town Plan of Conservation and Development, and the effective date of the zone text change is 4/27/25. Anything else?
Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Willett seconded it. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Moving on to application 2513P, 250 Rye Street Distribution.
So I think we are unseating Commissioner Bugansky and seating,
Right, so Commissioner Viteri is now seated again.
however, Commissioner Cavagnero, I believe, was absent for this public hearing at the last meeting, but if you reviewed the recording of the meeting, you are still able to vote.
I'm gonna have to join Commissioner Viteri in this. I don't have time to review this part, so I will recuse myself from
So
that.
are we gonna see?
We're now seating Commissioner Bugansky.
Except I think,
I was not, I was traveling for, I saw bits and pieces, but I did not watch.
okay,
So we just thought we'll go
Well,
with 6.
I think Commissioner Qureshi was there, if,
Oh, we
I forgot.
see.
I tried to-
All right, we got
So
ourselves.
Commissioner Qureshi is seated for Commissioner Cavagnero on application 2513P. So we have a lot of notes on that.
So what I did is I did give you updated approval conditions, kind of going through what we talked about at the minutes and whatever, and what the applicant had offered, so like 17, I think, no queuing of backup trucks shall be allowed on Rye Street. In the event of backup occur, applicant will be required to provide alternate plan to accommodate the trucks. In accordance with performance standards listed, a written assessment will be provided. That was something the applicant had stated in their narrative about providing that. The owner shall return to the commission with final design and use of the rail spur. Truck routing plan submitted shall be required, the required route for trucks coming and leaving the site. Again, some of the advantages of making these approval conditions is then they're now enforceable, right? So if we have a problem with any of these, you go back to the approval and you've got an enforceable condition. So that's kind of one of the reasons we made these special exceptions.
Discussion, comments, questions? So I guess I still have a concern that that situation could lead to a backup on Sullivan Avenue, which is a state road. And are we dealing with that effectively, or is that something we leave up to the state to deal with?
The train, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
So I am putting an approval condition for them to return to you with the rail spur plan.
which one is that?
Number 19.
Okay. And that's coming to us or to you?
Well, it's gonna have to be you and the state, right? So, I mean, they have to have an approved plan to be able to go to the state for approval.
So, I mean, are we asking them to come and have another meeting with us, or would you, the staff level?
No, this is having you coming back to you guys.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's not gonna be,
So any other questions or comments?
That train has to be pretty darn long for it to reach that spur, cause I think it's about 2,500 feet from Sullivan Avenue. I think an average rail car is about 60 feet or so. I was there today, and the backup comes when it drops off to Nera, the plant right there.
Right.
So that's where the backup starts on Sullivan, because they deliver the stuff for like paving driveways and stuff is what they do there. So I think going down that far is, you'd have to have a lot of rail cars.
And they only have 4
And
cars.
there's usually, I don't think I've ever counted more than
I mean,
20 cars behind it.
I mean, unless they had a train with all those cars and they're just not bothering to break the train up, because it's a Home Depot line and everything. I mean, we get a lot of complaints about the line near Home Depot.
Yeah, there's not too much going past it. I mean, there's a couple cars that go up to the fertilizer plant up there in East Windsor, and that's really kind of the end of the track of it, as of right now. But
Okay, good, useful information.
I sit at that intersection a lot, so.
Well, is there a way, maybe talking to the railroad to get information on, would that even happen? Would that even occur? Would there be a train that length that would back up to block Sullivan Avenue? Because I hear what he's saying. It sounds unlikely, but I don't know.
They don't have a tenant.
they don't have a, right, again, it's kind of
Technically, yeah.
premature to even discuss it because they're gonna get someone that doesn't want rail. I mean, you're hoping to get a rail tenant, but they don't know for sure, so.
So we do have a
You have
provision
something
in
that
here.
requires them to come back to you, and I think that it's fair game to ask those questions.
That's number 19.
Number 19.
Okay.
You wanna do a thing, guys?
I wanna read this motion in.
Okay, we're gonna make a motion to approve application 25-13P, 250 Rise Street. We have standard approval conditions 1 and 2. Number 3, this application is subject to the conditions of approval of the Inland Wetlands Agency Conservation Commission, including bonds in the amount of $35,000 to ensure compliance with the erosion and sediment control measures, and $35,000 to ensure establishment of storm water system, and $5,000 to ensure a proper installation, follow-up inspection, and maintenance of mitigation measures to be held for 3 years. 4 is a landscape bond in the amount of $20,000, which is required. It must be submitted prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy if work is not completed. Then we have standard approval conditions 5 through 12. And then we go 13, engineering comments dated 4/7/25 shall be incorporated into the final plans. Parking requirement chart shall be updated to clarify the EV charger requirements for all parking. Number 15, prior to the construction of any reserved parking stalls shall
I think that's supposed to be
Staff?
staff.
Okay, staff shall review the proposed landscaping to ensure appropriate screening of loading dock doors. 16, all rooftop units shall be screened from the public way. 17, no queuing backup of trucks shall be allowed on Rise Street. In the event backups occur, the applicant will be required to provide alternate plan to accommodate these trucks. 18, in accordance with performance standards listed in section 4.5.8, a written assessment will be provided at the time of the future tenant's occupation. 19, the owner shall return to the commission with the final design and use of the rail spur. And lastly, number 20, the truck routing plan submitted shall be the required route for trucks coming to and leaving the site.
Do we have a second?
I second it.
Okay, Commissioner Vitale seconded it. Just getting back to this rail spur thing, let's say the first tenant does not use the rail spur, and then they come back in and say, well, we're gonna put the rail spur in afterwards, which we've already approved. Are they still gonna be the second owner, the second business that wants the rail spur, they're gonna be subject to this provision also?
I think anybody that wants to use it is gonna be subject to that provision. Yeah. Because it runs with the land, right? Is approval is gonna run with the land, because it's special exception approval, so yeah.
Any other comments or questions? Take a motion to vote. We'll vote on the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Excuse me.
Choke them up.
Any opposed?
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Now we get to the fun part.
Really?
Okay. So I kinda had hopefully had Josh put in order, right? We're on to the next one? I wanted to just kinda go over several different things, so I'm gonna kinda start with one, and when you have questions, just interrupt me. But I wanted to just give you kind of a brief update on the affordable housing statistics. It's kind of interesting when you get and the reason I provided the chart, because, you know, all of a sudden now we're at, a different percentage than we were a year ago, and we didn't do anything different. So I wanted you to understand how that happens. And how that happens is we get different credit for different kinds of things. So in this particular, thing, we got more, CHFA loans were given in our town, as well as rental assistance, so it ended up in our number rising of the units that are assisted. And so we're at a 6.4% rather than a 6.3 or something like that. So my point is it shifts slightly, it doesn't shift a great deal, but we still are, you know, behind the 8 ball as far as getting anywhere towards the points needed for a moratorium. We just do good to just keep trucking along and creating the units. We've put the zoning in place that you can put in place to create units and keep doing that. So I wanted just to provide it to you, just because I do get asked periodically, you know, where are we, how many units do we need, that kind of thing. And it's a little bit complicated on how you do the point calculation. I'm not gonna run it by, but if anybody's interested, I'd be glad to. Different unit types give you different kinds of points, different things like that. Again, we're far from meeting anything that would get us another moratorium at this point. I also gave you, just as informational, we get this quarterly newsletter, and it has latest case law that's happened. And I don't know if anybody's been following the 830G in Glastonbury, but the question's been, you know, the 830G law says it shouldn't be subject in the industrial areas of town. They're kind of protected from an 830G. Glastonbury has an area that's kind of a it's a commercial area, quasi-industrial, because it allows a little bit of industrial uses, but the question was, they claimed it's not subject in there because it has industrial uses. So the court has kind of come down and said that, you know, if your industrial area includes a lot of different things, residential uses and whatnot, it's really not truly an industrial area, and maybe it's gonna be subject to an 830G. So that's just something I just want you to be aware of, because it is, you know, kind of guidance for us. Steve and I have talked about it a little bit, and we're gonna kind of segue into the industrial use table, and you'll notice the first thing in the industrial use table is residential, and how we allow residential uses in our industrial zone. So it's something that you might wanna consider, like right now, someone could choose to come in and do a new residential house on an industrial zone and meet that requirement. We do have, and Pat will know, he just bought one, we do have properties out there that have houses that go back and have industrial uses in our commercial zones. It used to be that you had to either live in the house or the caretaker along with the business. We changed the regulations a while back to allow, by special exception, that it can become a rental property, which is, people were having difficulty selling these properties. So, my point is, we may wanna change it so that you don't have any new residential construction, that you have existing ones that are out there that, you know, you could either make non-conforming by not allowing it, or by saying as of, you know, April 2025, no new residential dwellings can be built in the industrial zone, you know, existing dwellings can be used. I just wanted to make you aware of it, because it is something, that we might wanna consider. We don't have a lot of them around town, but, you know, you just gotta go through our industrial corridors and you see an occasional house. And Burnham Street's a real good example of where you have houses that's all in the industrial zone down there.
You know what I found interesting is that no matter how many bedrooms, you still get 1.5 points per unit. So a studio is 1.5, a 4-bedroom is 1.5.
So what are you looking at?
Just your first page.
Oh, yeah, in that particular, the type of
Yeah.
unit that's being created. So if you
Yes.
go into one that's an assisted living, like the Metro units,
Yeah.
there's a different calculation, whether it's elderly, family, that kind of thing. So those kind of projects yield you more points.
And I would think that Deming would be even more because of the.
I don't
the
know,
clients.
you're gonna get probably the highest for, that type of,
Yes.
supportive housing. It
Yes.
Gives you some, so I couldn't calculate it out, cause I don't know what his bedroom count is. But the ones you're looking at, when it's something that's being, Evergreen Walk, you put a requirement of an affordable in it, they count. Yeah, because they're not they're not assisted by the project, they're basically subsidized by the other units, is really what ends up happening indirectly, right? So it's different project types give you different kind of points.
Interesting.
So, it depends on if you're looking at the points or the total assisted units that you have, if you will.
For moratorium, we need 217, right? So,
Yeah, so again, it goes to what your, unit you have at the census time. So every 10 years, it kind of gives you a new number of what you're aiming for to get a moratorium, so.
I thought it was interesting that pretty much every abutting town to us, except for Ellington, is over 10%. East Hartford, Vernon, Manchester.
But again, look at the communities, they all
Not
have
towns you
different
wanna live
communities
in.
than we have.
Doesn't surprise
They have
me, but-
downtowns, right, different than we have, older communities, yeah.
I've just been holding on here, you know.
In some of the stuff that I always feel it doesn't really reflect is, we have a lot of accessory apartments in town. We have other kinds of housing that I think is more affordable than what, some of what gets counted, but, right now that doesn't get the
It's
count.
too bad, like our mobile home parks and things like that.
I thought we did get some, you can make an accessory.
Well, you could deed restrict it. I mean, you could, you'd have the 40-year deed restricted to have it count. Yeah, they haven't come up with any way to have it be part of the formula, so. So I guess my message to you is just keep chugging along. I mean, we put all the regulations in place that, I think were fair for inclusionary zoning, and now when you see developments come in and they get approved and go into construction, you'll start creating these units.
This is
I
good
forget.
data, thanks.
Very good data.
I forget which newspaper I saw it, but there was an article about something going through the legislature that we could be required to build, to allow through zoning an additional 1,000 to 1,300 units,
Yeah, there's
depending on which policy they choose or which method of calculating they use. I don't know if you've heard anything about that,
Well,
but
there's been a lot of different bills that have floated around. I don't know, Alan may know what's the latest ones that are making it through, but there have been some that have been talked about trying to come up with, it's all about encouraging communities to put regulations in place to support housing, right? I don't know that any of them are gonna be mandates, but, again, I think you've done some of that work, you have inclusionary zoning, which a lot of communities don't have, so we're kind of, we're, the housing that we're approving is density housing, right? So that's the kind of stuff that they're looking for towns to put into the regulations to allow. Whether or not there'll be a number that they make you create or target or whatever, I don't know, what the carrot and stick will be to get you there. I think you just gotta kinda wait and see, a lot of ideas come out during the session, what actually ends up law, we kinda have to wait and find out, and then react to it at that point. So I would expect something to come out, cause they've been incrementally, trying to up the ante as far as, having more housing at the local level.
okay, so you wanna lead us through these?
Yes, so let's go right
Changes?
into,
I think that, one point is these vary between substantial policy changes to trivial clarifications.
I would say majority of them are, just clarifications. We kinda have an ongoing zoning book that we look to when we come across things that we wanna clean up, we've been marking up. The ones that are policy, I'll point out really, and let you know. Probably the biggest one, if you go to your industrial commercial chart, right? So we're looking at making some changes to this, Article 4. We'll start there. Again, on the first page, I would recommend we do something with residential in our industrial zone. We might wanna, maybe I can come up with some wording to maybe not allow new construction of residential in the industrial zone, but allow, so maybe I'll work on some wording related to that. Down at the bottom of the page, you'll see that I'm adding religious institutions. And I gave you
So you
some,
would, I mean, you would also eliminate assisted living and duplex and multifamily?
they're not in the industrial zone currently, right? If you look at the use chart.
Oh, okay, because of the,
Correct.
oh, right, oh,
Right,
okay.
so they're not allowed currently. The bottom of the page, religious institutions, this has been around for a long time. You know, the thought process is if you allow assembly, places of assembly in your other zones, which we do in all of our commercial zones and our industrial zones, religious institutions should benefit from that, being a use allowed in that zone. So there's a lot of federal law, you know, and, I did give you some information on some of the direction that's been given to municipalities and states over the years. So it's kind of, we don't have any pressing question on it or whatnot. We've had it for time to time where we've had some of our religious institutions come in for temporary conditional permits and go into our industrial areas. I can remember way back when on 251 Sullivan Ave, the A-frame used to be at the church years and years ago, back in the 90s. So we've had it periodically, but this would allow someone to actually come in and make an application and go through your process.
So you're just, I mean,
I'm just adding it, I'm suggesting adding it as a use across the board there.
Makes sense.
Michelle,
Yes.
how do you want us to respond or follow up? Do you want us to?
If you have any questions now, I mean, so what I'm giving you is a bunch of suggestions. If you guys are comfortable and you want it, what we'll do is go through our normal process of sending them to CROG and then going to public hearing, right?
Yeah,
But if it's time now, like, you're gonna find I have a couple, this week I had 2 people come to me with uses that aren't in the table that they wanna do in town. So I'm wondering, what do you guys think? So, some of that, so it's a little bit of a discussion, right? If you have something you wanna add at this point.
I would say, rather than going around asking everybody what they think, if you've got something that you wanna say,
Yeah, cause I'm gonna go quickly just 'cause.
we'll just make sure that only one person is speaking at any given time. Okay.
So the next page, you're gonna see some markouts, and again, I'm just kinda cleaning up, we've added things to the regulations and the repetitive. A retail store is the same thing as a convenience store, is the same, you know, so we're trying to just eliminate, we'd have different developers come in and add their own language, and we just didn't really clean it up. So those are really nothing more than cleanup on that page.
So, underneath where you have automotive fuel struck, and it has for a special permit or site plan or special exception, so for DC, so, I mean, there's only one DC left, right? So, forget it, yeah.
It's ironic, that was only in design commercial.
Yeah, and that was when the Sands or whatever was gonna go there. The bottom of page 4, this was somebody, tattoo parlors, we had actually written out of being a personal service shop in the 90s, because we didn't want tattoo parlors. We have several in town that have been here over 20 years, in the restricted commercial zone specifically, so I would recommend not treating them any differently than we do a dressmaker or you know, anything else. I would add them up to the list of uses, because they're very commonplace. So it's just, again, a cleanup of the regulations. What happens if someone wants to buy a property and do a tattoo parlor and it has that wording in there, all of a sudden, you know, they got a zoning problem, so we don't really wanna create that.
So what about massage, services, which
Again, the massage
could go two ways.
therapists.
One is it's a legitimate business, and the other, it's a, you know, a source of,
So we've always had massage therapists going into a lot of our restricted commercial zones, so if you want the word massage therapist in there, we can certainly add that. I don't think we have any wording right now, right?
and then, I mean, the state law makes sure they have to be licensed.
Yeah, see, so I would consider it a similar establishment. The problem is that we've identified tattoo parlor separately as not being allowed. That's really what I want to correct.
I think we ought to know about this.
So, on page 6,
Yep.
distribution facility, in light of our last discussion, can we better define it?
Yeah, so what I told Steve asked me about that. As I mentioned, I'm sitting on a committee right now, and it's a warehousing committee, that's a regional study that's going on, and I got a meeting coming up in another 2-3 weeks. I'm gonna discuss with them, and I'm gonna see if we can't nail down some good definitions for you, so, yeah. So we'll just put that on hold. But going to page 6, so I've struggled in, so I've decided to eliminate wholesale the bottom wholesale. I'm not really quite sure what that is and how wholesale happens like that. what we tend to see is wholesale in our industrial zone, where they're wholesaling something and, you know, a small scale wholesaler, and they're delivering their product from there. We had it by special exception, you're gonna see an application in front of you, this guy is gonna have a small unit that he wants to sell product, and because it's considered wholesale, he needs to get a special exception permit. I think that's a little onerous, I think it should be just by site plan, you know, reviewing it and making sure because he's in one of these small units and, you know, one of your little incubator spaces. So I think how we see wholesaling occur at small scale, so I would recommend just making it be site plan approval. And then eliminating it in our general commercial zone, because we really don't see that kind of activity going in.
So isn't this really an attempt to cover the Costco's and the BJ's and the Sam's?
I'm not really sure, I think it's earlier than that, I mean, this goes way back, this language does, I'm not really quite sure what it was covering, but it was a long time ago. It's holdover language.
Because they use the word wholesale, but they're really,
See, so I went ahead and gave you a definition of what a wholesale is on the next page, what I would say to add into the regulations. Way Best Chicken, David thinks it may have come from Way Best Chicken, which was a little bit before my time. Early 80s, right?
Can't be, Michelle.
but this is,
There was time before Michelle.
Costco just falls into the real, retail,
Retail, yeah.
which is a plain old
They're technically referred to as club membership. That's
You know,
a category.
and at the end of the day, they're retail, right? So I mean, how many ways do you wanna slice it and dice it? Sometimes it gets a little bit watered down, you know, or repetitive. So those are what I have for the use table. So let me tell you about two uses that have just come into me. A gentleman would like to have live livestock retail outlet. So in other words, he's got the chickens that you pick the chicken you want for him to kill to sell to you.
Oh.
So
As
how
long as
does,
it doesn't happen like it went in Bloomfield,
Yeah, I
where
was gonna
it's
say,
got out in the middle of the road and.
That was like a couple years ago. If you go there now, they've actually fenced it
it's actually,
and
they
they've
did a good
improved
job.
it quite a bit. But you go there and you're like, you pick a chicken. You don't pick the chicken, you just have the chicken.
And so he came in and he's been
Not
looking,
that one.
Lobster restaurant, you get a lobster.
so he did provide me kind of, and maybe I'll just hand it out and we can, you know, people can read about it and decide whether it's something you wanna, give me some feedback on, but he's been looking in our town, he's found a piece of property in the general commercial zone. And so I said to him, well, write me a little narrative of what your business model is, cause I didn't know how to explain it. So he gave me quite a bit of information, I don't know if you wanna look at it now or later, but that's one use. The other one's a little simpler. The other one, someone would like to train dogs, and they train, they're military dogs or police dogs that they train. So they wanna go onto an industrial site, but they also wanna be able to have the dogs boarded overnight there. So it would be a training facility and boarding of dogs, so we have, in our regulations, we allow training facilities in industrial zone, we allow boarding of dogs in industrial zone, we don't allow them kind of as a combined use necessarily. So I told her to, again, give me a narrative of what she wanted to do. I'm inclined to say it would be coming in by a special exception, because that's how we would treat a training facility or a boarding kennel in the industrial zone. So I would direct her that find a site that's industrial zone and come in by special exception.
I've had many friends with large dogs, scary kind of dogs, that they wanna send them somewhere for 3 months. And that's all they do is train them, they come back, they're like,
So maybe it's this is it's military and police kind of training
yeah,
facility.
oh, specifically that.
Specifically this, but
Oh.
it, you know, but it would be boarding as well.
Residential.
And, you know, I got to thinking, we have our animal shelter right there in the industrial zone, so
True.
the more I thought about it, I wasn't even gonna ask you, but no, I thought I would ask you guys, because I'd like to be able to say that you understand the EDC. So she may choose to come in and fall through an application.
so are we saying that he'd actually be able to get it approved with the current regulations?
I think you have a section, other permitted uses, if they're similar to what's in your use table, and I think this is similar enough to enough uses in there that.
Okay.
And what you say in that section is either process allowed and it's by special exception, so that would be what we'd have her do. Okay. So those were the other two uses that have kind of come up. So if we wanna move on, the next one I'm gonna hand over to Justin. Justin made some changes in the landscaping and lighting section.
Yes, so, section 6.2, I took a look at I took a look at landscaping in several parts of our regulations, but starting off with landscaping and buffers, a big chunk of this was just putting language in the regs to have applicants use plants that are native to our area, just to give our local wildlife just benefits better from having native plants. Native plants are more adapted to conditions of the area, they're lower maintenance. It's just ecologically, it's just a good thing to do.
No. Are you still on A?
That was sort of generally, but I mean, that's dotted throughout a lot of these changes, but
I guess I would ask if the kind of things that we're letting people put in right now, call arborvitaes and so on, they may not be the native version of a plant, but they might be something derived from a native version.
yeah, so a lot of the times, I mean, you can have like a cultivar, which is cultivated variety, so you can have different types of an arborvitae. It's still an American arborvitae, but it's, you know, maybe you're selecting certain things about it for height or width or color. So it's still derived from the American arborvitae, but, you know,
Do we need to make sure that that's permitted in this paragraph? Cultivars derived from,
could elaborate on that and include cultivars in there. That's definitely something that can be added to it.
I think that's great though.
So there's a lot of, that's a lot of the language in 6.2, when you look at.
Sure, so why do we remove SRDs?
SRDs don't require buffers.
Yeah, that was a mistake when it, the regular, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really clean up
Yeah.
the previous
But
change.
one other thing, I mean, is lawn grass considered landscaping, and if so, how does this affect lawn grass?
So, yeah, I did have some language in here, I think it was this section. So either this section or maybe it was the following one. Yeah, lawn is lawn. You know, I would really, we can add something in here clarifying that. I wasn't really gonna be picking on lawn specifically for this. There is another reg that I modified in here, just saying that reasonable care should be made to, in areas where maybe lawn isn't necessary, maybe you use a seed mix, you know, something that's gonna grow, and maybe it has wildflowers in it, or certain types of grasses that are good for birds, insects, foraging animals, cause to have a bunch of lawn, and the only purpose is to just mow it, kinda seems,
Ground cover?
yeah, right, the lawn kinda seems a little wasteful, and, I don't know. But I do have something in there that would say areas that are not subject to heavy foot traffic. You know, so if, like on one side of a big industrial building, why does it have to be lawn?
But are we saying that lawns also have to be native, or?
I wouldn't go that far, because a lot of the times it's composed, like those lawn mixes are composed of a lot of different types of seed. I wouldn't go that far. So we could include language in there to maybe clarify that, say lawn seed mixes, you know, whatever.
So I have a naive question on this.
Sure.
Does this requirement potentially put an undue financial burden on a developer?
I wouldn't say so. No, I wouldn't say that native plants are any more expensive than exotic plants. I think really when you start to look at, oftentimes exotic plants are more expensive. And really the cost comes in when you're looking at sizes, heights, you know, that's really when you start to spend more money.
And this really kind of deals with the invasive species, just by, if it's a native plant, it's not invasive.
Yeah, so invasive species, actually still in Connecticut, a lot of nurseries still sell certain invasive species, burning bush, barberry. You can still pick that up and plant it, so kind of wanted to address that a little bit too. So that was, and then there was just some language clarification. So I thought I put page numbers on this, but I suppose it didn't quite make it to this one. There is just, when we talk about buffers, just specifying that all buffer areas are designed and certified by a Connecticut licensed landscape architect. Changing some language, bushes become shrubs, that's really just minor things. So there is a portion that talks about you guys having the ability to modify proposed landscaping plans, just adding something in there about, maybe you wanna add something that's more ecologically beneficial, so that's just some language there. And then, yeah, throughout the rest of that, it's really just addressing, putting that word in, native, just to really drive that point home. So, yeah, that was really the gist of section 6.2. So,
Makes sense.
any questions?
Questions, comments?
Great.
Okay,
Yeah,
so it
so
sounds like you're at least on the way to getting some favorable reviews of this.
that's good. So the next one is section 6.3 for outdoor lighting. So Michelle and I worked a lot on this, and we've been thinking about this for a little while. So the goal with this was really to control light in a way where the color temperature of it is warmer, better for night skies, better for light pollution. Looking at controlling light with dimmers, timers, and sensors so things aren't unnecessarily lit. Hopefully to save applicants some money on energy costs as well. Because a lot of the times things are lit just for the sake of lighting it. And I mean, cutting that out is good for the owner of the light and also the town. So just adding some information in there, under purpose, clarifying specific standards regarding lighting to maximize effectiveness of site lighting, enhance public safety and welfare, reduce impacts to wildlife by avoiding unnecessary upward illumination, which we go into a little bit further down, and to reduce energy costs for applicants. So through the illumination standards in 632, so I have language in there about providing shielding that reduces backlight. So, that can be good to, like, I think of Ken Boyan's recent project. He was showing us some lights that were coming in, and one of my suggestions was to put in some shielding. He had some lights that were they were right in front of some of the houses. So some shielding on the back would prevent any glare from getting into people's windows. So it's just a way to control light and really make sure that it's focused in the area that you wanna light, eliminating that unnecessary lighting. Again, yeah, controlling with dimmers, timers, and sensors, changing the color temperature. Michelle and I had referenced a couple of documents, so International Dark Sky, or Dark Sky Association, and also Lights Out Connecticut is sort of like the same, they do similar things where they have a lot of guidelines just to how to, protect the night sky. There was another item in here, just defining bug ratings, BUG, backlight, uplight, and glare. So giving a little bit more information on that because, like when I'm reviewing a lighting plan, I look for the bug light, like the bug rating. Specifically the uplight, because that's how we have language in here saying that it should be dark sky compliant. Part of that is having a certain U rating in that bug rating. So that would just be providing applicants, or having applicants provide that with their photometric plans, information about reducing off-site glare. So some of it repeats itself a little bit, just driving that point home of the color temperature, reducing the glare, and incorporating the dimmers, timers, and sensors. And then I added in some definitions in 637 to clarify what backlight was, what BUG was. I also did address one thing, that we have a definition here, it was called grandfathered luminaires. I just changed that to vested. From what I've seen, vested is a more proper term. grandfathering, if you really wanna get into it, has some roots in slavery. So just kinda wanted to nix that.
So on the topic of vested.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking, that we're going back to our sign, the whole sign thing we did. If I think, what's the church, what's at Five Corners, what's the church? The bit that has the uplighting
Yeah,
on both the signs and on the building.
yeah.
How do we at some point, when they have to change the fixture, get them to come in, get people to come into compliance, so that they're not indefinitely vested?
Yeah, I would love to address those upward directed spotlights.
Especially like lighting the steeple, you,
Yeah, so just so you know, you either, hopefully they someday want a new sign and they do it, or, you know, you come with some kind of targeted program where you do some outreach and you say, hey, we have new regulations and, you know, that kind of thing.
Okay.
You know,
So
it could be done, you could do it that way.
that kind of brings up what was going through my mind. You mentioned signs. We have 6.5 is the sign regulations, and there's a lot of lighting in there. Does this conflict or provide, and I didn't have a chance to answer the question myself, but how does this relate to the sign regulations? They're dealing with light.
Yeah.
We got the uplight issue and so on.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think the sign regs, they were geared more towards
The lighting of signs themselves
Signs,
like-
specifically, right, yeah.
and the I see what you're saying.
I think, Steve, after we created, when we did the sign regulations, we did look at our lighting section of the sign regulations and we did put some information in. I think, based on some of the information, that I got at my conference recently about lighting of signs, we might wanna revisit the chart that we put together, so let us look at that and we, a little bit separately from this.
I mean, I think
This is mainly about site lighting, this is particular, you
I
know.
mean, I think some of the same principles apply, and this is a broader
Correct.
application. I mean, anything that's being lit, where the signs are just signs. So I guess it's all right for the signs to kind of repeat what's in here, or maybe make it tighter in some way.
Reflect it, yeah,
Yeah, they definitely should. Yeah, talk to each
And
other.
I think, and I think we were always trying in the sign regulations to be cognizant of not, uplighting and things like that, so I think we did address that, in some of the lighting, I'd have to go back.
So, section 11.3, just to stay in the topic of lighting. So section 11.3, that's appendix C of our regulations. It has outdoor lighting guidelines. This was, really just tying this towards section 6.3, adding information there. Dark sky compliant lighting will help save on energy costs, driving that point home. We have a category, or categories looking at light, whether it's useful, targeted, low light levels, controlled, and the color. So just providing information, more information in the useful category. So considering how use of light will impact energy bills, the surrounding area, the night sky, local wildlife, and the environment. So just adding language in there. And then when you go down to color, again, it's just reiterating. So use warmer color lights, which we already had in there, but then giving a little bit more information, no greater than 3,000 K. So that's that. And yeah, those two things, it's, really just like repetition and just having them communicate with each other. So any questions on lighting? Further questions? Any recommendations?
I think it makes a lot of sense what you got here.
Good. So, the next thing, going back to landscaping, section 6.4.6, this is parking lot landscaping. So, keeping with that same spirit, trees that are native to the northeastern United States. I removed flowering trees from this. Flowering trees, so we encourage shade trees in parking lots. Flowering trees sometimes don't really do so well in parking lots because they can be sensitive to the harsh conditions of a parking lot. And really, when you think about like trees in a parking lot, you kind of want something that's gonna grow taller and have a little bit bigger canopy to give some shade. Parking lots are hot, or at least they can tend to be.
I don't know if people want a lot of flower petals on their car when they come back out.
Probably not, yeah.
They do stain sometimes.
Yeah, right. So just trying to eliminate some of that. And again, so item E, the location of landscaping, just reinforcing that shall incorporate diverse plant material native to the northeastern United States. I added in some information on the second page, item G, preferred plantings. So this was tailored a little bit more towards like conservation easements and regulated wetland areas, but the language I put in there broadened that. So it's just an encouragement, it's not necessarily a requirement, but it's just saying all parcels are encouraged to include tree, shrub, and perennial plantings that are native to the northeastern United States and beneficial to wildlife, and then just a list of suggested plantings that I found over the years tend to do well, that are relatively tough and have a high ecological value. So just put in all the Latin names there.
So do you have a source for this list, or is that your own personal knowledge and experience?
Yeah, it's just sort of things that I've compiled just over the years. Nothing, I mean, there definitely are sources that I reference frequently, but you know, these are just things that I've seen to work well. So that's section 6.4.6, parking lot landscaping. Questions? The last one would be section 11.9, which is appendix I, so this talks about our buffer and landscape designs. Just reiterating that, you know, talking about the native plants. Also noting in there that care shall be taken to ensure that buffers will not be impassable to wildlife. The buffers are good, but I think it's important to not create barriers. And then adding in some kind of language corrections, and then when we're talking about planting for air pollution removal, we had trees and shrubs, but I added perennials in there too, just as another layer in there. We had grasses in there, so I didn't see a reason why perennials, flowers, things like that could not also be in there. So aesthetically, it looks nice, and then again, it's just another layer for that air pollution removal. And yeah, just some language cleanup, you know, grammatical, and that's really all I had for the appendix. So that wraps that up, my portion.
Okay, if you have no questions, we'll move on to, you were handed out tonight in front of you a drainage section, storm drainage. So I asked Jeff Doolittle, to take a look at the storm drainage section of the zoning regulations. This goes back to 2004, I think was the last time we updated, if you'll see, he's recommending we add our 224. So what we're gonna do is wholesale delete the section, add in a new section. Although it doesn't vary tremendously, it made it simpler than trying to read in the change. So, this is based on the latest, best management practices of engineering, of what they look for when, you know, engineering studies are come in and whatnot. So, he and John, his engineer, worked on this. The one comment I did give him is, where B1 says the town may waive, we'll take waive out of there and we'll put modify instead of waive. So we're trying to get away from using language of waivers in your regulations, so. But beyond that, I couldn't answer too many questions about it, but I suggest you read through it. If it has any questions specifically, we can certainly, get Jeff Doolittle to weigh in on anything specifically. But it really was to beef up what he typically requires to come in when he's reviewing a plan, right? So we make sure we have a regulation to support it.
So this just aligns with what the state of Connecticut is.
Correct.
Okay, so.
Yeah, it's pretty standard, yeah. And so then the last thing I think I have, gave you some information on, two things. Let's talk about accessory apartments first. So you have an existing accessory apartment regulation. A couple things have come up recently in people trying to put accessory apartments into their properties. And it primarily deals with existing structures that are there. It's the old barn, the old garage, it's on an open lot. So one of two problems usually happens. Usually the apartment they wanna make and it's too large compared to doing 30% of their floor area of their house or 1,000 square feet. So they might have like 1,200 square feet or 800 square feet and they gotta make 100 of it dead space to meet the requirements, which, you box out a dead space area. Or the second thing we're running into is we say you have to be 30 feet from the property line. There's some nice structures that sit 20 feet that could be made into an accessory apartment and really not have an impact on a neighbor, and would be, something people are, hoping to do. So I didn't know if, we're not seeing a ton of them, but we are seeing them come in. I didn't know if you had any appetite of looking at existing structures. So again, if someone wanted to do a brand new detached accessory structure, we wouldn't have this discussion, but I'm talking about existing structures. If you wanna create some flexibility that they may get utilized. Again, we could always make sure there's a cap of its size. We're not looking to put 2,000 square foot accessory apartments in people's backyards, but, you have some existing structures out there that, would be really nice for someone's daughter to live in, and it's, 20 feet from the property line, so we can't even have that discussion. And so I told them that we would be talking in general about some regulations tonight and that I'd bring it up and see if there's any appetite to try to add some more flexibility, and again, in existing detached structures is
Gonna
primarily.
be existing as of the approval date of,
Right, yeah, things that are out there now.
Is there anything in the accessory structures that limits, like having school-aged children to go to the school in? So you have
No, I don't need.
two families into, there's no way to kind of
No,
limit
I mean,
that
you
part
could,
of
you
it.
could have accessory structures be limited to one bedroom units, right? I mean, by nature,
But there's no way to say that you can't have another family living in it that's gonna put more kids in
that
the
would be
school system.
discriminatory. Keeping them small makes them be that you don't tend to have families coming out of them, so, I think the 1,000 square foot maximum works in general, but again, it's these occasional outbuildings that you have, and whether or not we want to.
I don't know if I'm gonna say this right, but is this perfect barn that's 20 feet from the property line in conformance?
Yeah, the setback in the zone is 20 feet.
All right, and so our regs say if it's accessory, it's 30.
We say if you wanna turn it into an apartment, the structure you're starting with has to be 30 feet. So, again, 20 feet's not very far from a property line, so it might be that you look at them circumstantially, maybe by special exception, and then you're looking at what kind of, if you're up against a road, which the situation is, versus up against a 10-foot side yard of someone's house, it's a different scenario. So, I mean, we could try to build some special exception criteria of, what we're trying to get at is having it be private and not be intrusive.
And I don't really know much about zoning board of appeals, but is that something in an appeal process?
Well, I mean, you could, so what is the hardship? You're looking to financially gain a unit on your lot, so to me, I could come up with 1,000 reasons why it shouldn't be approved legally. And right now, you have a very good zoning board of appeals that's highly trained but has no applications in front of them, so I wouldn't know how they would handle something. Oh, actually, I do know, they did deny recently someone who was looking for a similar type variance like that, to be able to use it at 20 feet.
So does that say anything to us? No, okay.
Again, they didn't have enough information, it wasn't a very good, solid application. It's just something that maybe you wanna think about a little bit, look around and see what you have. It's in some of our older areas of town where you have older structures sitting out there. I wouldn't recommend it be any closer than 20, right, cause 20 is the minimum you have in your setbacks, in like your RR zones, so. So that's really the one question on accessory apartments that Pam and I both had it come up in different ways. as we permit. And we are permitting some of them, maybe what I should let you know is how many we've permitted in the last 6 months, just so you have an idea of how they're coming on the line. Because they are just a zoning approval.
We had one that came in that was pretty fancy, right?
Yeah, you had one come into you because it was a detached, but we're doing several of them, you know, if it's internal to the house, you don't see it, it's a staff
Right.
level approval, so I could let you know how many we're starting to see if that's of interest.
But the detached ones are the ones where,
The attached ones are the ones that we're running into people asking us questions about. And, you know, I don't like to send anybody ZBA, because again, I don't think it would be successful. Should be successful,
I think though, I mean,
unless you guys tell me.
you said something, an example of a 20-foot setback, and there's a house 10 feet from the property line on the other side for some reason, you know. Should we put in a distance from structures, other structures, or,
Residences?
I mean, you can do it, right now that you put 30 feet, I mean, you could, if you wanted to change it and say,
well, that's from the property line, but, you know, let's say your house is where you are, and I wanna put a structure there, I mean, the location of houses or structures, I think is gonna be an important consideration when you're doing that special exception. But we gotta be careful that we don't have it shoved down our throat because we weren't properly generous with the special exception. So the more we can be specific, I don't know.
Did you say you are getting a study, I mean, like,
I mean, I can find out, Pam, our zoning officer, she's the one that permits these, right? I could ask her to do me a quick query of how many we've done over the last year. Or since we put the regulation in place, maybe it would be interesting to know. Because just for brief history for newer commissioners, you know, we used to have in-law apartments that we granted, and every 5 years you renewed them. When we put this regulation in place, we sent out letters to everybody that had an in-law apartment and said, okay, your in-law apartment is now considered an accessory apartment if you want it to be. Let us know. So we're still seeing some come back online that were, you know, in-law apartments, and maybe they weren't being used, and now someone new's bought it and gets educated about the accessory apartment. So I don't wanna say they're all brand new, but they are being permitted, so I could give you a, you know, summary of how many, you know about the detached ones because they come in front of you, and we've had one.
to go back to the question, we can't ask or put any kind of, even for in-laws within the unit, so we have no idea if that's what's adding maybe some of the jump in some of the schools on the counts, right?
But again, I can tell you how many you have,
Right,
right?
we can't.
And it's not a huge number, right? I mean, we track in-law and accessory apartments. I think it's 106 two families is a number that comes to my mind that we had the last time I did something with the assessor. That's how many houses have apartments in them. Some of them go back in time, right? Because a lot of Main Street have apartments that go back to a long time ago. But I mean, as far as how many we have of accessory apartments, I mean, we're not talking about more than 20 or 30 that have been, you know, approved through some kind of zoning permit. It's not
That's
huge.
been approved, right?
Yeah, it's not huge. That's not causing your school problem.
By the
I
ones
get
who've
it though,
not.
but no, it's not quite that. So, so we'll kind of let that one sit and people can mull that over. All right, and then I think the last thing I had was, so I went to a conference recently and I went to a session that was all about short-term rentals. And if the commission remembers, we had someone come in front of you a while back looking to add Airbnb. The commission denied the text amendment. I did provide you with recent legislation that basically says that that is one of the uses you have as an American. If you have a house, you can rent it unless the regulations don't allow you to. So the question comes up, do you wanna create a short-term rental regulation? I kinda gave you a pros and cons list. One of the things I think of our town is, just to give you an example, I think there's 5 of them right now if you go out on Airbnb that you can find. So it still happens in town. I was talking with the planner for Enfield, she's got like 50 of them. So I mean, you know, again, depends on your capacity and whether you wanna do enforcement or you wanna try to allow it. I look at it as an opportunity maybe, since we do have a housing, you know, we really don't wanna create more school children, maybe giving people some opportunity to make their house be an Airbnb, doesn't cause as much turnover maybe. We don't have a lot of hotels in our town, so if someone wants to come and check out the area for 2 or 3 weeks, you don't have a lot of choices in town, you can go to surrounding towns and get something maybe, so maybe there's not, maybe there's some upsides to allowing it. I don't think there'd be a huge prevalence, like maybe I'm wrong, but you know, we're not really a destination tourist town, like most towns that have the problems are tourist towns,
We
right?
don't have a lake, we don't
You-
have,
you're not- you know, so-
stuff.
So to me, I kinda look at it, you could take a two-tier approach, we kinda talked about this when we were looking at it before, is have an ordinance that the town council puts in place, and we put a zoning regulation, and you have an annual, you know, fee that you collect, and, you know, maybe you limit by regulation, and it can only be 59, I mean, you could come up with some ways if you had concerns through a regulation, but there would be some opportunity to track these things, know about them, and then also, not that they'd be, have been big, but at least you could register them and
Yeah,
And if you don't do that, then it's kind of like a little bit
well,
of an
it really
unknown
is,
right now.
they really can do that, you know, I mean, that latest case law kinda says, that, you know, if you don't have a short-term rental regulation, then you can do short-term rentals. What is short-term?
Right,
you haven't
who's gonna
defined it,
define
right?
it, right?
So I think the definitions I've seen is 30 days or less as being, so I just wanna, and again, I gave you kind of a list of pros and cons, and the seminar I went to was, you know, people out in Colorado that, you know, half their town is Airbnb, and, you know, they're fighting to not have it be Airbnb. We kinda don't have that problem here, but we do have it as something
You
that,
just never know for the future, right? As
yeah,
I
and,
think
you know,
forward
and
thinking.
do you care if it's in a condo or a single-family house? I mean, some people have more concerns about condos being rented, cause now all of a sudden they're in your building versus, you know, those are kinds of things that you could look at through a regulation if you wanted to.
We can restrict it to specific zones too, if we want.
Yeah, you could do it in specific zones, I mean, that's an opportunity if you want, if you put
Yes,
in
the
the regulation.
parking, all that
Yep.
stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
just we have a,
some of the challenges are, there are public safety implications, so.
Yep.
A lot of noise complaints, you'll see increased police activity if somebody's renting a house for a bachelorette party or
right,
a guy's golf weekend or whatever, the things get out of control. And then the other piece of it is there is a burden on the town itself. If we're going to consider STRs, they should have to be licensed, number one, and number two, they should have to be inspected on an annual basis.
and that's kind of what we could build into
Yeah,
an ordinance.
yep.
Between an ordinance and a regulation, you could get at those things. Yeah. And there's a lot of examples, I didn't send you the tree of examples I have, but there's a lot of towns that are looking at it, and there's actually something floating in the legislation, I didn't bring it, 'cause who knows if it'll, but that maybe some towns would get some sales tax back on them if they had them, so there may be some opportunity in the future for that too, so if it's something you want us to look at, we can kind of come up with a draft of something. I'd talk with the town manager, because again, I would want to do it in conjunction with an ordinance so that you have the police power end of it.
Yeah.
Because that's where,
Yes.
you know, ultimately enforcement's gonna happen if you have an enforcement,
And
so you
fire,
wanna have that.
potentially fire.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I don't know if it, I doubt it, I don't know if it happens here, but there was like a lot of newspaper articles where people were like, they rent out their home, just like we think about not being a destination, but if you're someone who's got a pool and you have outdoor space, people are renting your property for big parties. Like
Bring 'em
your
in by
neighbors
busload,
have
yeah.
no idea that that's what you're, right, and
And
then,
they don't
3 o'clock in the
leave, right?
morning,
Isn't there
there's
that-
still
right,
party.
there's still a big liability standpoint.
But people were renting out their garages too, like that was a thing, you could just rent your garage or you could rent out your pool for an afternoon to
Right,
somebody.
did you
to-
see that, some guy, I think it was like New York Times, something, like, he made a significant amount of money.
There's a guy in
renting
West
out his
Hartford that
pool.
does it, some friends do it. Rent out indoor pool.
Okay, so we'll just
Yeah,
Yeah, it's probably
mull
worth.
it over a little bit more.
Yes.
and-
yeah.
So then the only other thing I'm just gonna say, Steve did his homework and gave me a sheet and a half of things that we might wanna look at the regulations, and he and I talked about them, I'm not gonna go through them, other than to say that a lot of them are like little cleanup things, I think, there really weren't too many policy issues in any of this, I think the only question of policy issues was in your affordable units, do you wanna write anything to allow affordable units to be smaller to help entice them, and as I said in the text amendment that you have pending with you, that's gonna go to public hearing, they have that kind of language in there. So we can maybe see how that plays out in that language there, and if it's something that people think is a good idea, we can look to do it here, nobody's looking for it right now, so I wouldn't, initiate it. The other things are some, just, again, collapsing some of the, cleaning up some of the language, so I will mark up some other texts, and what I was thinking I might do is email it all out to everybody, it'll be a red line markup, Again, nothing that I think is of any huge substance that you're gonna care too much about, but if people have any questions or whatever, we can certainly put on a future agenda. If not, maybe then we can send a package off to CROG and maybe one of our June meetings, try to do a budget text amendments.
The one reason we're not giving you this is because Michelle and I had a conversation that, said, well, this isn't really appropriate, this isn't, so rather than waste your time on the things that we wouldn't, if we were to rewrite this, it wouldn't be in there, so I like that approach.
And some of these we addressed in our regulations ahead of time, because you and I have been talking about stuff, so sometime in the next couple, we actually have 3 weeks between now and our next meeting, just the way the calendar falls. I'll probably get it out to you in the next week, just a bunch of little tweaks and, you know. So really, other than anything else anybody has that they can think of, zoning regulation wise, that's really what Justin and I had tonight. Oh, I do wanna just mention the zoning map. So, our zoning map has 2 errors on it that we're gonna be correcting. One of the things that we've never put on our zoning map is we've never put our office conversion overlay zones on them. We've never identified the properties that have received that. So we're gonna identify those properties. I think there's all 5 or 7 of them. The other thing is, as Steve was mentioning, our Sullivan Ave, Buckland Road access management overlay zone does not reflect on the map either, so I'm gonna kind of get that bubbled, because again, that is a zone. The 2 properties that need to be fixed is the one property on Sullivan Ave, the Imperial Oil site is reflected as general commercial, when really it's an industrial piece. And then there's a property over on Route 5 that has a small sliver in the back that needs to get changed to general commercial. So we just wanna clean it up, and then we can take it out and have it be a 2025 zoning map, but I just wanna make you aware that we're in the throes of getting that cleaned up and get that out to everybody.
Is that actually, I mean, the equivalent of a text change, and it has to go through the same-
What I would do is I'd put it on for a public hearing when we do it, just to re-adopt the zoning map with minor.
Not just correcting things that are already established,
We're adding things that didn't show up on it previously, so there's no harm in doing it at a public hearing, so. When we do the other stuff, we would have it ready.
So what's the follow-up on all these changes that you and Justin went over? Are you gonna make those, and we gonna get replacements for?
So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna give you a couple more for you to look at, and then once you sign off on all that, we're gonna send them all off to CROG, and we're gonna have to go to public hearing, because your regulations only get changed after having a public hearing. What we also have, just so you know how the law works, is we have a registry. So the law says that if you wanna find out what your planning and zoning is doing, the regulations, you can sign up with your planning department. And whenever your planning and zoning goes to change regulations, you gotta get notified. So we have a registry of probably about, I don't know how many, 20 people maybe? Something like that. That anytime you propose text changes, we have to notify, we give them a copy of the legal notice, so that if someone wants to monitor changes in the town. So that's something that was set up years ago in the law, so.
So I know you said if we propose it, but if it's
For
someone
an
else.
applicant, it's not required. We don't have to notify the registry. It's only when it's initiated by the municipality.
So everything that's redlined that is reviewed today, all that goes to public hearing.
Correct. What we'll do is we'll obviously have a legal notice. We'll put it all out on our website. We'll have a public hearing, and we'll briefly, just kind of not even get into the minutia that we got in tonight. People can look at it ahead of time if they want to. And none of them are major changes, right? Nothing we're doing is significant changes. So it'll be advertised as minor changes to all these different sections, so, yeah.
And any applications in the works already don't have to comply.
Correct, it'll have effective date, and so anything from that point forward, yeah. So we look to do it sometime before the end of June, get a public hearing going, so. Okay. Well, thank you very much for indulging us.
Do we have any other business? Let me get back to the agenda here.
No bonds.
Just give a couple of training updates. There is I emailed you about a few trainings that Yukon Clear is offering. I think Commissioner Dexter is doing the one on May 17th. That one on May 17th is on the science and regulation of wetlands in Connecticut. I think the deadline to sign up is about a week before, so if anyone else is interested, there is still time. There's another one coming up this Saturday, April 26th, and the deadline for that one was supposed to have been last weekend, but they sent out the email again, and I think they're looking for more in-person attendees. That one is a basic training for new commissioners and for anyone who needs a refresher. So if anyone is interested this Saturday, it is in Haddam. I believe it's from 9 to 12. I sent out an email about it.
I actually went to that last year when I first started here. It was pretty helpful. They don't really get it. It's not like nitty gritty, but it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Then if I could just confirm how many people went to the webinar on March 22nd. I think there were 4 of you. I think you went, you and Commissioner Fatiri, and I know Commissioner Bernstein went, and I think 3 of you went to the in-person in Southington, and so I'll make sure to track that in your training as well.
Great with your hours. Good
Yeah.
job. I just have one other announcement. Jeff Doolittle's retirement party is gonna be May 30th.
Oh,
1 to 4 at Illicit Brewery, similar to what we did with Jeff Folger last year.
yeah.
We will no
So-
longer have any Jeffs in
No
this
Jeffs
building.
in the conversation. So if anybody's interested,
For,
yeah,
illicit.
at Illicit Brewery, yeah. I'll email it out to everybody.
Yes,
so,
thank you,
Yeah.
thank you, I liked it better.
I will again be traveling.
You got a busy travel schedule.
I have a heavy spring traveling schedule.
Is there
Okay,
collection or anything? Is it
any
on-
other old business? Okay. Motion to adjourn, anyone?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Commissioner Willett? and Commissioner Gallinaro. All in favor?